Hello, my name's Vicky Swank, and I was scheduled to speak to leaders of tomorrow tonight. Unfortunately, we had a power outage on campus, so I'm recording this discussion in my home. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you because I have prepared a PowerPoint. Hopefully that's clear. So I've titled the discussion, "What do you want your financial future to look like?" This is a subject that I have a huge passion about. I actually worked in finance for 25 years, and my job was to manage other people's money. Because I worked for a publicly traded company, those other people were the owners of the company, the stockholders. And the budgets that I managed ranged anywhere from $100 million to $600 million. And I took that job very seriously. It's a lot of money, number one. Number two, it was somebody else's money other than my own. And what I began to realize early in my career is I didn't always make the best choices with my own money, even though I was very serious about handling other people's money and how I managed that. And I fell into the trap that I tell my students: the more money you make, the more money you spend. If you don't get a handle on your spending behavior, and if you're not disciplined about your budgeting process, you're going to spend whatever money you make. And as your salary grows, so will your spending grow. Now, today, I am on track with my financial goals and with my retirement planning. But had I started earlier at a younger age, at an age where you are or where you will be when you first graduate from college, then my timeline and my goals may look very different. So my goal today is that you will hear something during this discussion that will impact you enough to actually change your behavior and the way you manage money, not just for a short period of time, but actually forever. So what do you want your financial future to look like? I want you to reflect on that as we go through this discussion. And there's several learning objectives that I have in mind. First one is we're going to talk about tracking specific ways that we're using money and how can we become savers if that's not something that we currently do. The second one is to understand our inner needs and wants. What's the difference between a need and a want, especially when we are spending money? Thirdly, we're going to talk about setting financial goals and then implementing those goals through budgeting. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the basic foundations of retirement planning. So there's a lot of surveys out there, and this statistic caught my eye. 72% of Gen Zers feel regret about their personal spending habits. So what can we do about that feeling of regret? Well, I have a solution for you, and it's called the 30-day challenge. It is extremely necessary, and it's easy to get lost in that if we don't pay some real attention to it. So the 30-day challenge that I have for you is for the next 30 days, and I do this in my personal finance class. It's the first assignment that the students have. For 30 days, you're going to track every penny that you spend. And you can track it and log it however you want. You can log it on paper, you can log it in your phone, you can put it in Excel. I have an example on the next slide. It doesn't matter how you track it. The importance is that you do track it for 30 days, every single penny. And you want to classify it as to what category you're spending it, or even the place. You can be that detailed. But think about it as after the 30 days, you want to be able to look at however you have tracked this, and you can tell someone where every penny of your money went. It's descriptive enough. So here's an example on the next slide. I just created a quick Excel spreadsheet. You would have each day of the month, and then you would categorize where your money was spent. At the end of 30 days, you're going to total up each category. And it is going to shock you. It's guaranteed to get your attention. Many students of mine have done this exercise, and they totally are blown away by the amount of money that they're spending on things that they didn't even realize they were spending that much. It's because they're tracking it, which makes a huge difference. So that's the 30-day challenge. Now, once we get a handle on where our money is going, we still have to control our spending behavior, and we want to turn and become savers of our money. Another statistic that caught my eye was 41% of Gen Zers feel anxious about their finances. And that's not something that we ever want to experience. We don't want to feel anxious about how we manage our money. We don't want our money to control us. We want to control what we're doing with our money. And so we're going to talk about how do we get control of our money. Well, saving is a starting point for that. And the definition of savings is very simple, right? It's money that you set aside today to use in the future. That's the purpose of a savings account. You're going to use it in the future. Well, with COVID, actually Americans are saving more money. And that's not a surprise because of the fact that where do you go these days, right, to spend your money? So many, people don't want to go to the store. They don't go out to eat as much. So it limits our access to that impulse spending. Now, you still have the online purchasing that certainly is a place for spending money, and we're going to address that. But it is good at least to see that with what we've experienced since March, that Americans are saving more money. And the question is, what about you? How's that impacted your spending? Have you seen an opportunity where you can actually save more money than from what you were doing before? So I wanted you to reflect on that, because if you don't have a savings account, now's a great time to start one, because our access is still limited, especially on a lot of those things that we typically were spending money on. So how am I going to get into the habit of saving money? Because saving, it's about saving. It's the first step to meeting those financial goals that you set for yourself that we'll talk about later. So how do I get in a habit of doing that? It's not easy. First step is to start with an achievable goal. How much money do you want to save? But you notice I use the word habit. So just deciding to save $500 in the next month does not necessarily make it become a habit. So there's a lot of studies done on how long does it take for a behavior to actually turn into a habit. And you may have a guess at that. I'm not sure if your guess is this much, but it's actually 254 days. So the saving behavior that we're going to change about ourselves has to continue for 254 days, according to the study, before it actually becomes a habit and becomes something that we will continue to do throughout our lifetime. And just saying you're going to save money isn't necessarily going to move you into that, where it's a habit. You have to reflect on what motivates you to save money. What big ticket item are you really interested in? Maybe you want to buy a house after graduation. Maybe you want to take a really nice trip somewhere. Maybe you have school loans that you don't want to have that kind of debt for very long. We're all different and we all have different goals. But this is where you have to reflect and determine what is going to motivate you to push you to start changing your behavior, and that is saving money. So it's very important to have that goal that is important to you. But what if saving money is difficult? You want to save, you know you should save, but it still is hard to do. And there's a lot of people that fall into that category. Well, there's a few tips that's out there. And I mean, there's a lot more, but these are the ones that I think are have some validity and work. First one is making your savings visible. And this works with any time you set a goal, right? Is you want to make the progress visible. So whether you just put money in a jar and that's how you're saving money, or an envelope, or an online account, you want it to be visible. You want to view the balance regularly so that you see progress and you're motivated by the progress. It's really motivating when you get money in a savings account and then you're not always transferring it out because you're spending on things that you don't need. So watching that balance grow is hugely motivating. Another one I like, especially for online purchases, works really good during COVID, is the 24-hour rule. And the way this works is for any non-essential item, you would wait 24 hours before purchasing. So you put it in the online shopping cart, and you can view it, but you don't check out and pay for it for 24 hours. You let 24 hours pass, and then if you still really want it, maybe it's something that you should spend your money on. But a lot of times when we wait, that impulse buying goes away, and it's just not as fun anymore, or we start to justify to ourselves why we really don't need that item. Some people use the treat yourself, but use it as an opportunity to save rationale. And the way this works is if you treat yourself, if you splurge on something for yourself, then you take the same amount of money and put it into savings. So it helps you build your savings account that way. The last one is my favorite. It's called Think Like a Saver. And you're actually calculating the purchases by the hours worked. So an example of this, the way it would work is, let's say you found a $30 pair of shoes that you really liked, and you make $10 an hour. So the shoes would cost you 3 hours of your time. And that's how you view it, because it's $30 for the shoes at $10 an hour. And then you start to think, are those shoes really worth 3 hours of my time? It puts it into a whole different perspective for you when you're thinking about how much you have to work for that item. And again, what we want these things to do for us is to cause us to reflect and decide, do we really need to spend our money on that item, or should we keep our money? Because the more money you keep that you don't spend, you can put that into a savings account. We all need to have an emergency fund. And if we've learned a lot of things during COVID, but that's one that's very important, is Americans needed, well, the whole world needed to have an emergency fund because things happen, crises happen. And if you don't have money saved up to cover your bills, then you're going to end up having to borrow. And unfortunately, 37% of Americans have to borrow money if they're hit with an unexpected bill. And an unexpected bill could be just you need new tires on your car and you don't have the money to pay for them. So then what do? You put it on a credit card, or you borrow money from somebody that you know. You go into debt. And so if we build an emergency fund, we don't have to do that, because that's the purpose of an emergency fund. It's to cover yourself and your bills for a certain period of time. Now, rule of thumb is minimum of 3 months of your expenses saved up, but preferably 6 months. So if your monthly bills are $500 a month, you would want to have 6 times 500, $3,000 in your emergency fund. And that gives you peace of mind. So if anything happened that you can't work, you get laid off, you lose your job completely, heaven forbid you get hurt, you don't have to worry that your bills are not covered because you've got an emergency fund. So how do you get started with an emergency fund? It's a form of savings, but there are ways. First, you have to set that goal. What is going to be in your emergency fund? And a lot of people say $1,000 is a great place to start. It's motivating if you can get that first $1,000 saved if you don't have a savings account. Doesn't have to be 1,000, can be a different amount for yourself, but start with some kind of goal. And then you want to get there quickly. You want to try to get there within a month, 2 months, 3 months max. You don't want to spread this out. Now, how do you do that? Well, I've had students who take my class after we've established that this is one of their first goals they should work towards. They just go home and look at what they have that they could sell. And they sell stuff. And then they have their savings goal already achieved. So you may have things that you could just sell to help you get to that goal. Or maybe you look for one-time income opportunities. Can you pick up some extra cash doing things for other people? And you put 100% of that cash into your emergency fund. Maybe getting a second job. Not the best thing to do when you're in college, but maybe for a short time just to get your emergency fund built up. You can make cuts in your spending, and for every dollar that you cut, you can pledge to put that into your savings account to build your emergency fund. Once you've saved the first $1,000 of your emergency fund, then you want to keep adding to it. As I said, optimal is to have 6 months of your monthly expenses. And once you get there, once you have 6 months of your monthly expenses saved up, you're going to be hugely motivated to keep saving your money because of just how vastly you see it grow. And then your next step can be saving for retirement, which I know seems crazy. Got to bear with me. You're young. Why do I have to even think about retirement? We're going to get there at the end of this discussion. So we have established that saving is important. We have tried to set guidelines and offer tips on how we can create a behavior of saving. And we know that behavior takes time, takes an average of 254 days to make a behavior into a habit. So how do we control our spending while we are building this habit of, I'm going to save money. It's going to be part of what I do on a monthly basis. How do we control our spending? And how do we determine if something is a need or a want? Because there's a difference. Well, if you run a Google search, you can get the definitions. A want is a desire, right? I desire something. And a need is I require it. So very different definitions. But we are good at justifying a purchase. We are good at twisting a want into a need. We can justify it. And that's what enables us to feel okay about impulse buys, because we can make it seem like it's a need when it was really a want. So the way to stop ourselves from doing that is looking at it from the basis of the 4 walls. So anything that is a real need falls into the 4 walls category. That would be food, the place to live, utilities, basic clothing, and I underline the word basic, and transportation. We have to get to our job, we have to get to school. So again, we need some form of transportation. Now, the 4 walls, you can, by looking at that, you could see that there can be a lot of gray area in, well, what's really a need, even when it's the 4 walls. Food, for an example. Do you have to eat out 5 times a week? Or is there a different way to get the food that you need that still meet the fact that it's one of the 4 walls? You've got to eat to live. So there's still gray area in that. Because of that, I like to use the Moscow method when talking about needs and wants. And the Moscow method is actually used in business to help prioritize resources. But this applies because it's our personal finance and our money is a resource, and we definitely need to know how to prioritize it. So it actually works okay in this process. Again, mainly because the basic needs can become a blur, and we can move wants into the need category and try to justify that it's a 4 wall. So here's how the Moscow method works. You have the must-haves, the should-haves, the could-haves, and the won't-haves. And we categorize the items using this scale. So the must-haves are obviously the actual needs and the 4 walls. And some questions that we can ask ourselves is, what happens if I don't spend my money on this item? So just run through that. If I don't spend my money on this item, what is going to happen? And obviously, if it's essential, that's going to come out when you question yourself, and it's truly a must-have. But let's take our example of eating out 5 times. That we have managed to justify ourselves that that is a need of ours, because food is one of the 4 walls. So I have eaten out 4 times this week. I'm thinking about a 5th, and so I asked this question: what happens if I don't spend money on eating out? Am I not going to eat? Or is there another option? Can I go to Safeway, get something from the deli cheaper, maybe even get some groceries that are less expensive? If there's another option, then it's not a must-have. So I would say it moves down a notch, and at least we are in the should-haves. And the should-haves are things that we consider as important. They're not vital like the must-haves, but they have a high priority. They're very desirable. just not essential. And when we meet them, they add value to our life. And a question that we ask ourselves here is there a workaround? Is there a workaround to do this? So we're back to our example of eating out 5 times. Well, the must-have, it didn't meet that, right? It's not a must. And so we're down to the should-have. So the question is there a workaround to eating out for that 5th time this week? Is there some other option I can do and still meet my goals? Definitely, right? I don't have to eat out. I can eat less expensively. There are other options. I can go to my friend's house. I could buy some inexpensive groceries. I don't have to go out. So now we've moved it down to the could have section. And the could haves are things that are really nice to have. They certainly have a lower priority than the should haves. Okay, the should haves are important, but not vital. The could haves are just things that are nice to have. But if I don't get it, there's not a problem. I'm not meeting my needs. And the could haves are really if I have extra money left over. So if I have extra money left over and I want to spend it, then I can buy something in the could have section. So in this case, with our example, if I had extra money left over this week and I just thought I wanted to spend it on eating out, there was some good reason for it, well, it's a could have. I would put it in that category. But if I don't have extra money this week, and of course we haven't talked yet about budgeting, but if I don't have enough, then it's in the W category. It's in the I shouldn't have this, I won't have this, it's only a wish. And I can certainly wait for this until later. So using the Moscow method, mentally going through this process, when you are buying something, it takes some work, but I strongly recommend it. Because a lot of things that we think are in the M category, you'll soon see that they can fall down into a different classification. And they could be a should have or a could have or even a won't or wish have. And then you're going to end up walking away from it. And that's the goal here. Here's another example, but I'm going to push past this just because of time. But one thing I want to say about this example is it's often very constructive to always start at the W level. So when you go to spend your money on something, immediately put it into that W category using the Moscow, which is won't have or wish I only wish for it. And then you ask your question, can I wait until later for this item? And if you can't, if the answer's no, then it moves up a category to the C's, to the could haves. And then does it just become something nice that you want to spend your money on? Or is it a should have? But then you ask the question, well, is there a workaround to this? Is this really necessary? Or could I do something else? And then ultimately getting to the must have. So if you start at the bottom first, then again, it's a way of mentally walking yourself through is this really a need or is this really a want? So we've talked about needs and wants. We talked about savings. Now I have to sell you on the whole budgeting process because budgeting is very, very important. It's disciplining ourselves. I like to call it naming your money, right? So once you've tracked your money, you know where you're spending your money, then you decide where you want to spend your money, you're actually naming it. You're giving it, these are my rent dollars, these are my gas dollars, these are my going out to have fun dollars. and they have a name instead of a, I don't know what happened to my money dollars. So you know exactly where your money's going when you budget, and you have complete control and complete freedom over your own money, which is huge. Now I have a lot of students that will tell me, yeah, I budget. And I'll say, oh, let me know what your process is. And they will say, oh, it's in my head. My budget's in my head. Well, mental budgeting doesn't work for a lot of reasons, but mainly because it leads to unplanned spending, because we haven't named all of our dollars when we have a mental budget. So we end up spending money on things that we weren't planning to spend it on, and that's not how budgeting works, right? Budgeting is we know where we want our money to go, but it also takes away accountability for us. We lose accountability with a mental budget because there's really nothing to track or measure. And we need to hold ourselves accountable when it comes to a budget. For sure, we need to do that. We budget to acquire the savings. Now, we've already talked about the importance of saving for an emergency fund, having our savings goals, controlling our spending. And so the next step is to put all of what we've learned into actually budget creation. And budgeting savings is paying yourself first. You're taking money from your paycheck and you're putting it into a savings account, and that's paying you, right? Because your savings account is yours, and it's yours to use for whatever items that you plan it for. We budget the must-haves first. That makes sense. The items that fall into the 4 walls and the M category using the Moscow method. What we don't want to do is spend too much money and then have must-haves still left to pay in our budget, right? So it's very important that we keep track of, that we budget our must-haves first, because that means we got to have those things. And a budget, as I already said, it gives us freedom. It gives us power over our own money. Now, it usually takes about 3 or 4 months to get a handle on budgeting. So don't be discouraged if you start and it doesn't quite work out the first month. It takes time, it takes practice, and it takes adjustment. You might set your budget at one level and then decide that you needed more money or less money in that category. And then just remember, it takes 254 days to turn a behavior into a habit. So setting financial goals goes along with budgeting, because we have to have goals as part of our budget. What are we budgeting for? Those are financial goals. You may decide you want to buy a new car. Well, you have to budget to get yourself in a position where you can buy a new car. So the financial goal would be buying the car. Or actually, that's a great goal to have. So setting goals holds us accountable when we want to make so that they're achievable. And when we set financial goals, we use the SMART goal method. And you probably have already heard of this because it works for our own personal goals. This works for any time you set a goal. They should always be SMART goals. The SMART goal, you want it to be specific and as detailed as you can make it. Ask questions, who, what, and why. And the more specific the goal, the greater the chance you have of achieving that goal. You want the goal to be measurable. That's how you hold yourself accountable, and that's how you track your own progress. Is it something that you can measure? How am I doing on this goal? You want it to be achievable. It doesn't have to be easy, but the goal needs to be achievable. If you set a goal that you're never going to achieve, it's not going to motivate you, right? How are you going to achieve, how are you even going to try to work towards that? The goal needs to be relevant. they need to matter to you. So when you're setting the goal, you need to be committed to it because it's relevant to your situation. And then lastly, you need to have a timeline. When are you going to achieve this goal? Again, it helps you keep yourself on track. So here's an example of a SMART goal. I want to save $25 every month starting on October 1st for 2 years to build the emergency fund of $600. So that is very specific. It is measurable because you're going to save $25 every month, and after 2 years, you better have $600. So it's measurable and you can track your progress. It's achievable, assuming that you have income that you can set aside for this. It's relevant because we've talked about the importance of an emergency fund, and there's a timeline. You're going to do it every month for 2 years. So this is a great example of a SMART goal. And then once you set that goal, then you're going to determine what steps you're going to do to meet that goal. And you're going to budget those steps. So in this case, if you're building a budget, you'd have to put $25 a month in your budget, right? That goes into your emergency fund. And then how are you going to track your progress? You've got to track your progress. If you don't track your progress, then it doesn't really matter, right? What those goals are, because you probably aren't going to achieve them. So budgeting itself, once you've set the goals, you're ready to put all of this information into an actual budget. And there's lots of methods out there that you can use to budget. And I was so excited when I saw this statistic. 68% of Gen Z use some type of budgeting tools. So hopefully you fall into that category. And they can be apps. There's plenty of them out there, sometimes just on paper. We don't count mental budgeting as part of this. Maybe something that comes with your bank. Or me, I just use an Excel spreadsheet. It's pretty boring, but it gets the job done. Whatever method you use doesn't matter as long as it's something that that keeps you on track and that helps you manage your money. There are a couple apps that are good. Mint is a really good app. It's secure. It syncs with your bank account, and if you have credit cards, it is created by Intuit, which also creates TurboTax and QuickBooks. It has a bill paying function. It tracks what you're spending by category. It will alert you of overspending and tell you if you're over budget. So it has some great bells and whistles. And it's free. So it's probably one of the most common budgeting apps that I've seen. I actually used Mint for a very short time, but then I went back to Excel because that's just what I'm used to, and it works for me, and it helps hold me accountable. Another good app is called Pocket Guard, and also links to financial accounts. It's a little bit easier to set up than Mint is, and Pocket Guard will help you find ways to save money. I have not explored Pocket Guard, but I have heard good things about it. And again, there's lots of other apps out there if you want to research different ones. Just find something that works for you. And what I have here is just what would a monthly budget look like? And it needs to have certain things. It needs to have the categories that apply to you, and you get that, you'll have that after your 30 days tracking where your money goes. Then you know, well, this is how much I should be budgeting for that particular category because it's where you're spending it now. You do notice, though, this budget has a savings section. So you always want to make sure that you have savings in your budget. But you have a budget amount, and then you have an actual amount because we hold ourselves accountable. So you have to track what are you actually spending in those categories that you have budgeted, and then there's a difference, right? You're either over budget or you might be under budget. And when you have differences and variances, that's when you make those adjustments. So maybe you under budgeted gas and you were just off on how much you typically would spend, then next month you budget more. So you make those adjustments. But this helps hold us accountable, right? Is our money's not lost somewhere. It's like, I'm really not sure where it went. At least we know where the money was supposed to go and then where it ended up when you're comparing budget to actual. Now, one way you can budget that a lot of people recommend is called the 50-20-30 rule. This may or may not apply to you, but 50% is budgeted on needs, 20% on savings, and then you have the 30% left over for those should have items, those could have items, and those that fall into the wishes or the wants. You definitely budget your must-haves first. So using the Moscow method, any items that fall into the must-haves that are part of the 4 walls, you budget those first. And then anything that falls below the must-haves, that would go into your 30% category. Savings, obviously very important. That's where the 20% goes. You put your financial goals into your budget, and you're on your way. Now, how can I stay within my budget? Oh, sometimes that's really hard, especially if you see an item that you want to buy that you didn't have budgeted and it's on sale and it's just so attractive to you. So how can I stay on budget? Well, we can track how much money we spend in the budget category using the envelope system. I love the envelope system. And you're going to go, what? You have to use cash? But yes. For the envelope system to work, you actually have to put cash in an envelope. Whatever amount you budget for that category, you're going to put in an envelope. And on the first day of the month. And then when you, in this example, I say you put $65 in an envelope to eat out on the first day of the month. And then every time you eat out, you take money out of that envelope and you pay with cash, which, by the way, is very painful. And you can see what's left in your envelope. Well, what happens if midway through the month you're out of money? You don't have any more cash in your envelope for eating out. Guess what? You don't eat out. That's how this works. The envelope system keeps you accountable, keeps you on budget. And as I said, if you hand over cash, just try it. It is painful. You feel it so much more than if you're using plastic. And when you run out of the money, you stop. So you don't go over budget. It keeps you on track. And I recommend that you do this for at least one of your budget categories, but do it for all the categories where you have the most problem with overspending, because this will help you control your spending, guaranteed. So again, another 30-day challenge for the next 30 days, pick a category, put the cash in the envelope. Start using it, pay with cash, reflect on how you feel when you have to hand over the cash instead of the plastic, and then also reflect on how it makes you feel if you run out mid-month, but you stop yourself from overspending. That's a huge improvement. There's an electronic version out there of the envelope system called Good Budget, just in case you might want to look into that. But I really recommend doing it the old-fashioned way, taking an envelope, putting cash in it, and using the cash. It's hugely impactful. So we have talked about savings. We've talked about changing our behavior to become savers. We've talked about needs versus wants. We've talked about building an emergency fund. We have talked about budgeting. And now we're at the point where we're ready to think about retirement. And I mean, not you retiring, but saving for retirement, even at your young ages. It's very important. So this is a sad statistic. 50% of families between the ages of 50 and 55 have less than $8,000 saved for retirement. That would be outside of Social Security, of course. 1 in 5 baby boomers only are planning or have Social Security as their source of retirement. And the average amount that a worker gets paid with Social Security is $16,560 a year. So do you think you could live on $16,560 in a year? Maybe now, but when you're retired, that's not very much money. And that's really, really sad. And actually 69% of baby boomers plan that Social Security is going to be a major part of their retirement planning, when really Social Security is only covering on average about 33% of expenses. So there's a huge shortfall between Social Security and people saving on their own for their retirement. Huge shortfall. And what happens? Well, you're either going to have to work till you're really old, or going to have to get money some other way, or live with your kids when you're retirement age, or have your kids take care of you. You're going to have to find an option. So how much do you think you should save for retirement? Well, if you take personal finance, we actually go through this calculation. And it takes about a week in class, so I can't do that during this short time. But I do have some goals or rule of thumb you can use. First one is have at least 1 year of your salary saved by the time you're 30 years old. So whatever your salary is, you'd want to have that amount in a retirement account by the time you're 30. Then the next goal is you'd want 2 times your salary, so it's going to go up quicker by 35, and then 4 times your salary by 40. By age 40, you would want to have 4 times your salary in a retirement account. And a good starting point is at least 10% of your gross salary to put that into a retirement account. I'm not talking about emergency fund now. I'm talking about a specific retirement savings account. So these are hefty goals, but really important. Now, the good news is statistics show that actually millennials are saving for retirement at an earlier age than previous generations. So millennials right now are starting on average to save for retirement at age 23. Gen Xers started at 30 and baby boomers at 40. So how in the world are you going to get enough money to retire on? Because chances are you're going to need close to $2 million. Depends on how much you plan to spend, what age you want to retire. But because of inflation and time value of money, it could be close to $2 million by the time you reach retirement age. If you are in your, late teens, early 20s, how am I going to grow my money? Well, it's called compounding interest, and it is doable. So I'll just show you 2 examples. If you save $35 a month, starting at age 24, and assuming a 10% return on your investment, which is doable, you're going to have $1 million saved by the time you're 69. Now, if you wait and you start saving when you're 40, you would have to save $561 a month to get that same $1 million saved by age 69. So the impact of compounding interest is gigantic because $35 a month compared to $561 a month. So that's why it's so important for you to start now, because you're going to earn interest on interest on interest on the interest all through the time period. And it's going to get you much closer to your retirement goal if you start now. So how do you get started? Well, Dave Ramsey is a financial guru. He's really a funny guy. He's very direct, straightforward. I recommend that you listen to him. He has a radio show. People call in and ask him financial questions all the time. There's all kinds of YouTube videos out there of him and his radio show. And sometimes he's offensive with how he answers people, but usually what he's saying is very valid. So he has 7 baby steps that he teaches in his Financial Peace University, which I went through his Financial Peace University, and it was really, I thought it was very beneficial. The first step we've already talked about. You save for an emergency fund, a minimum of $1,000. Get that in a savings account as soon as possible, which we talked about. You sell something, find a way to get extra income, cut your spending, but get the first $1,000 quickly. Then the next baby step he recommends is to pay off all your debts from the smallest to the largest. He calls that debt snowball. And this does not include if you own a home, but other debts. So he definitely recommends getting your debts being debt-free. Then the third step is to increase your emergency fund so that you have 3 to 6 months of your expenses. And then after that, it's time to start your retirement fund. So when do you get started? I would definitely recommend that you need to get that emergency fund first, the first $1,000. And then beyond that, you want to increase it. And then it may be time for you to start a Roth IRA if you don't work for an employer that has a retirement plan. When you graduate, you may very well join an employer that offers a retirement plan, either a 401k or a 403b for a nonprofit. And many times the employer will contribute to your retirement plan as long as you participate. You always want to take advantage of that because it's free money. You put in a certain amount of money and they match it. That's how those plans work. And then it gets invested according to how you want it invested. And an administrator takes care of all that for you, and your money is going to grow. It goes back to the compounding interest that we talked about. But before that, you could open your own IRA. You don't have to wait until you get a job where there's an employer-sponsored retirement plan. And a good type of IRA to look at is a Roth IRA. And you can get a Roth IRA many places. I would start with your bank to see what they offer. And then I have a website here or a link that just lists different places where you could get a Roth IRA. And the advantages of a Roth IRA is that it's after-tax money now, but your investments will grow tax-free as long as you follow the rules. So you pay the taxes now at a much lower tax rate, and then when you get ready to take it out at retirement, you don't have to pay taxes on the growth in the money. You also can use a Roth IRA as a startup for your first house. So that's a good, also a good option for a Roth IRA. I really miss the fact that we could at least not do this during a live Zoom session. I hope that something I have said during this discussion has impacted you and will prompt you to change your the behavior and how you manage money. But I thank you for your time, and you can always reach out to me if you have any questions. I work a faculty member in the business department, and I am available to answer any questions.